All right, good day to you. Today we're going to talk about waves in this particular session. And one thing with waves is we found it's very abstract. I mean, you're just talking about what is a wave? A wave is
a wave is transfer of energy.
A transfer of energy. And so that is so abstract to students.
Yeah.
And so we want to do whatever we can to help pull that in.
And help make it real to them. Like they are using waves every day in lots of different ways.
And so we have a few things that will hopefully help you, some ideas to be able to help you make it a little more real to the students. And the first thing we have here, what do we have, Sarah?
We have a Bluetooth speaker.
They use Bluetooth. I mean, how many of them have headphones in as
Right.
you sit there teaching? And didn't see it. But so they use Bluetooth all the time. They're very used to Bluetooth. They understand Bluetooth. They don't realize oftentimes Bluetooth is a wave. And so it's part of the electromagnetic spectrum.
Right.
And so we really like the NASA electromagnetic spectrum that we have up. And so we like that display because we can start talking about the different wavelengths and the wave bands, right?
Right.
And so Bluetooth, the speaker, the nice part about the speaker is we're talking about more than one frequency at that point.
Exactly. When we're talking about Bluetooth waves, we're looking at the far, I think on our diagram that we have up here, the far left side we have our radio waves, and then on the upper end of the radio waves is where we're going to find the Bluetooth. It's the upper end of radio waves, the lower end of microwaves, but it's right there. It's part
still
of that
in the radio wave
electromagnetic
spectrum, a band.
Right, radio wave band.
Each section is considered a band, and that's still in that band.
Correct. And when we harness that Bluetooth energy, when we get those Bluetooth waves, high energy radio waves, they're received through here, they're transformed into sound waves that then we're able to listen to from the speaker, from the headphones. So, two different types of waves.
Yes. Which is really kind of neat. And I like playing the speaker and just ask them, how am I hearing this? What's happening? They're like, well, you have your phone, okay, but how is it getting there? It has to get from the phone to there somehow. And then it has to get from there to my ear somehow. So walk them through that understanding. That dialogue, I think, is very important for them to be able to make connections. I don't like lecturing that out. I like that being a dialogue with the students and have them come up with ideas. You can do a think, pair, share on that. Everybody get an idea, get a partner, talk to your idea about your partner, and come up with what we think might be happening here. You can have them draw it out, what they think is happening.
I like the drawing out.
Just share. And so there's Bluetooth. We also have a lot of devices use Bluetooth. We have a Bluetooth thermometer here, and so we could, if they've used these in the classroom, we can talk about them. We'll come back and talk about communication in a minute, though, right?
They might even have these at home with grilling thermometers, wireless thermometers for baking and grilling. So that's definitely around the home. There's more and more Bluetooth.
And so once we get the concept or idea of it's coming from an energy, we need to drive home the wave side of that. Now most of us have used, if we've taught waves, we've used like a slinky or something. You can use a rope, you can use a slinky. I really like the spring coils.
Right.
I like the plastic ones best. They seem to hold up a little bit better. They're not quite as long. I get these long coils just at Science Supply, and you can take this and stretch it out. I have a student hold one end, I hold the other, through the entire room. And so then you're immersed in them, rather than just doing a little demo in front of them. All of a sudden you're immersed with them. But the nice part about this is we can. Here, let me get just the end, and you pull the rest of the slack for me. There we go. We can make a nice little wave here. And now, I know a lot of you talk about the parts of a wave, and of course I agree, that's important to talk about the parts of a wave. And so we can talk about where is that crest or a node, right? We can talk about where the crest is, we can talk about the node, we have our troughs, we have our wavelengths, we have it all right there. Yeah, that's a little better. And this works really, really well. Then if you're going into, well, it's 7th grade, usually it does, like earthquakes. You're stay taught this way. If you're going into earthquakes, you can talk about your, pull that out, talk about your compression wave, and you can have that bounce back and forth. You do that with a really long one, that's really, really nice. You can also use these on a table. You can just set it on a table and you can do your waves back and forth like this to be able to see the waves. I like the upright a little bit better. Some of my teachers are like, absolutely not doing the upright. We do it on the floor. And hey, yeah, you do you.
And for that matter, if you're on the table or even if you're holding it or on the floor, you can use rope. If you don't have a slinky,
I just like using the spring. It gives me a little bit more bang for my buck. And I do a lot with the earthquake stuff. And so using this with earthquake compression wave, you can't do a compression wave with rope. But if we're just doing waves, totally unnecessary. Just use a rope. Just use a rope. That works just fine. Actually, we have like a rubber rope we use for sometimes, but that's just cotton. That will work just fine, and that makes great examples. Now, but when we do this, we want to talk about. Oh, we're not done with this. We want to talk about the amount of energy, right? We want to talk about wavelengths. Good. Step back just half a step there. Thank you. Now this. Well, that'd be half a wave. Oh, here we go. There we go. Nice. We have that 2 peaks. We have a full wavelength here. So I have students do this. Well, some classes, I gotta admit, I do it myself because I don't totally trust them. Not to like beat each other with it. But every once in a while you have that class. But usually I can have students do this. I'm like, all right, so now I would like to see more crest in here. So we need a shorter wavelength. How are you going to do that? And they will get to the point where they're really getting. It takes a lot more energy.
I think what we see though is that when you're using
really
more energy to make
it takes a lot more energy.
It does.
And so once again, we can go back to the electromagnetic spectrum now. Now we see those short wavelengths down on this side. The shorter wavelength. All right, was that more or less energy on the? Oh yes, remember that we had to use a lot more energy to make those shorter wavelengths.
Which means we get a lot more waves, but then between the wave crests where we measure that wavelength, we're going to have a shorter wavelength.
Yes.
So now we have that relationship that the shorter the wavelength, the higher the frequency and the higher the energy.
So more energy. And we have a lot of demonstrations we did like last year, and we'll put a link to last year's presentation. If you just want to see a bunch of demonstrations and stuff, you can do that.
Yeah. But then speaking of these great bands, not great bands. Speaking of the bands we have, great bands.
Oh, great bands.
I said it wrong. Yeah, we have the, on the electromagnetic spectrum, getting back to that, we have those bands on the electromagnetic spectrum that match up with these frequencies, with these wavelengths. And we talked about Bluetooth, we talked about radio waves, but if we move on, we have infrared radiation.
Yeah, we have the infrared remote controls. Most of your remote controls for devices use infrared. It's IR. And so a great way of doing this, showing this, I mean, they've used it. They understand that the remote control controls.
It communicates with different devices.
With the device. It tells the device what to do. And so they understand, they know that, they realize that. One quick demo we like to do on this is we will have, when I do it in the classroom, I'm doing waves, I'll be like, all right, everybody bring their phones out and put your camera on. And so which everyone has one, then I will press a button and I'm like, do you guys see that?
Through the camera.
Well, I'll ask them if they see it first.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You can't see that. You see nothing. But then we'll put a phone in front of it with the camera on, and through the camera, shine the camera lens, and we'll be able to see that depending on the phone type.
Some phones are going to have a filter on them that's going to block some of that infrared radiation.
Not block, what to do?
It's absorbing infrared radiation.
Because that brings us to our when a wave hits something, it's either going to be blocked, transmitted, or absorbed, or reflected. Yeah. Sorry, it's absorbed. You have me saying blocked. So it's either absorbed, transmitted, or reflected. And so we can actually use their phones for that. Like iPhones usually have that filter on there to block, which it absorbs the UV light or
the infrared
light. Sorry, that's kind of a fun one to do, and because they get to use their phone for science, which is cool. And it's just, I mean, some teachers use notebooking and stuff. That's a whole nother topic we'll go into, not today. And one of the
There's our
others,
infrared radiation, but we can continue moving down the electromagnetic spectrum. We come to ultraviolet.
ultraviolet is just another really nice demonstration because ultraviolet is what gives us sunburns. And so that's something that pretty much probably every student or darn near has had a sunburn at some time or known someone that did. And so when you talk about the ultraviolet, I like using the UV beads. I literally bought a huge pack of these like 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, and I still use them. And you can use them with, you can get the little lights, anything that emits in the UV wavelength, you can use. I like using the little black light that literally was in my room when I was a little kid, and so these things last a while. And so I don't touch it, but I will do this to show them that, hey, we're not touching the actual beads, so there's no touching involved, but what's happening. And that's where you get your oohs and ahs, of course. And so some kids have seen these and a lot haven't, though.
Right. And we can talk then, so again, this absorbing, reflecting, transmitting, we're absorbing that ultraviolet radiation, and then it's transmitting those colors that we can see from the visible light. So then we see this transmission of visible light. Then
when we're talking about, you talked about absorbed. And so when we talk about reflected, absorbed, or transmitted, I like using a laser pointer.
Right.
I will just point this at different places in the room and say, okay, like right now, we can see it on there. There's nothing, well, I'm making the assumption it's not on the other side of it, but so it would be absorbed. Well, what about we use this tub? You know, we kind of see through that. Well, as we can see, the dot is still there, so it's definitely being transmitted through, but we can also see that some of it is being absorbed by it, so you can see it on it. And what you're not seeing in the video side is you can also see on the wall behind the camera where some of it is reflected. And so I like shining this around and on different objects, you know, not in people's eyeballs, but it's tempting. But you know, it's, you know, hey, do I reflect, absorb, or transmit? You know, the books and that window. It's different things. It's kind of nice. And then we also get with regular light where sunglasses. These are lenses in my old sunglasses that I broke. I have enough of them. But we have that. Then we put this up, and we can see that the sunglasses indeed absorb some of the light and allow some to transmit through. And that's how it filters it out for us. Yes, there are polarized ones that have lines in them, and when you use those, you could turn it and that will, you know, block out, cancel out more. But that's something we don't need to go into for this because we just want to talk about absorption. For the transmitted, one thing that's fun to do is to have it transmit. If you have string, we did these with actually your kids not too long ago.
Yeah, they came and visited for the day.
They were here on break, and so just put a little hole in there, and then tie a knot off. I think did we use a washer, or did we just tie knots?
We just tied knots at the bottom of that.
I couldn't remember, but yeah, tie knots, then pull it through so it's tight, and then they can talk, and it will transmit back and forth.
But it transmits when you're pulling that line taut. You want the line taut. You don't want a lot of slack in that line because then your waves aren't going to be able to travel through and listen.
Yeah, they don't travel as well. And that's the same way if you're talking about anything. When I talk about earthquakes and stuff, if you talk about the soil types, if it's loose sandy soil like California, it's not transmitted as far. But here, like in the Midwest, where we have that nice hard solid bedrock, it transmits a lot further, so you can feel them further away. And the analogy I use for that is if I have a hard table and you were to put your ear right there and I smack this with a hammer, what's going to happen? Well, it's going to break your eardrum. It's going to be so loud. But if this was just a tub full of nothing but sand, what would happen? Well, nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing. And so, because the particles can't transmit because of the space between them. And so, but yeah, so keep those taut. That works really well. We did that with the students. We actually put a mic in one of them so that all of us could hear, everyone here could hear. And that was a lot of fun. If you haven't done that in a while, I strongly encourage you to do that because it is a lot of fun. Oh, and if you can't find reflective surfaces in your classroom, we forgot this. Aluminum foil works just fine. Just put some aluminum foil on something, or just set something like that out on your shelf, and think about what angle you want it to reflect at. If you're using the laser pointer, and so when you talk about reflective surfaces, sometimes you got to plant those little things in the classroom for the demo later. But there's that. And then now this is using waves for communication, right?
It is.
Now this is using waves for communication, right? This is using waves. My phone is using waves for communication.
The temperature sensor is communicating data through
so all of these things are
waves.
Ways of communicating. Now this is more an analog wave, right? And the digital obviously is a whole lot better. But then let's back it up a few 100 years. And one of the ways that we did transmit, ways we transmitted, was actually through Morse code. And so we would do long, short. So dot, dash, dot, dash. And that is a really fun way, kind of adventure to sidetrack with students. And you could do sound. We think of it as sound, but we can do it through light too. Here is Superheroes of Science through Morse code on light. Morse code, we like giving students these and have them come up with and try to make a message. If you're doing a little bit of computer science in your classroom, you can use an Arduino and you can actually make the sound. You can even get a keyer for your Arduino and make the actual sound.
Using the finger light is really similar to using Morse code. When we use Morse code, it's called CW because it's a continuous wave. And what happens is that wave is always traveling. We're breaking that wave when we use the keyer to make the dots and the dashes that you see. We're going to include a link to a Morse code handout with the different letters and what those dots and dashes would be. And this is just really a great way to show why it's useful to understand that light can be transmitted and we can make that useful with communication.
Yeah. So Morse code is simply the pattern that was it Samuel Morse developed with the dots and dashes. It's just simply the pattern. Whatever mechanism, like you mentioned continuous wave, if we're using a particular frequency and like for amateur radio, there's different bands, there's different frequencies that we can use for those, and the FCC has defined those. You can only use CW, which we use Morse code for CW because it's continuous wave. It's this continuous sound, very annoying sound, but you're breaking that sound up into little dots and dashes to make it a pattern. And the pattern we all agree to use in the world is Morse code. And so your students can actually use that code but use a different medium, where of course ours is through sound that we're doing on different frequencies, but theirs could be through light. Do you notice carefully notice, it's flashing. It's actually sending a code. This is infrared, it's the same frequency. Just like Morse code is a continuous wave, it's one frequency, just like this light is just that wavelength of light. This is using infrared wavelength. And the patterns, which some of these patterns are too fast for us to be able to see, even visualizing, because they're so fast we can't process that quickly.